Hi, I'm Caleb. Today I want to show you how you can get perfectly accurate cuts out of your miter saw. Now to do this, it's much easier if you have a square, something like this. This is a machinist square, or you can even do it with a speed square. What's really handy is if you have a combination square like this, because you can use something like this to set your 90, and since a combination square also has the 45-degree angle on it, you can also set your bevel. Now, I have a DeWalt DW713, and every saw, the adjustment is going to be different. However, the principle you follow is going to be the same for most any saw. Now, on most DeWalts, they have a detent plate that has several screws holding it in, and to adjust your 90 this way, you move the detent plate. On some saws, like the Hitachis, the detent plate and all this is fixed, and the fences are actually adjustable. So you can't adjust where it locks. Instead, you adjust the fence in relation to where the blade is going to be. Regardless of whether you're making an adjustment on a detent plate or adjusting the fence or something else, the procedure you're going to follow is going to be very similar on any saw. My saw has 3 screws holding the detent plate in place, one on each side and one in the middle. So you can see now with the detent plate loose, whenever I move my saw, that plate shifts. Now it doesn't have a lot of give, but that's okay because we're going to make some pretty fine adjustments. Now on my particular saw, whenever I'm setting it to the fence, I find it handy to put it down and then actually engage the lock to keep the saw down. That way I don't have to hold it down. Now you're just going to take your square, make sure that it's flush up against your fence, and then slide it against your blade. There's obviously a gap, so I'm going to try to close that gap until it's flush. Now that I think I have it in place, I'm just going to tighten down these screws. Now that I have it tight, I'm just going to check it again, make sure nothing's moved. And we look good. Now that we have the blade pretty close and square to the fence, we're going to adjust the bevel. And once we're done with that, then we're going to start making test cuts and dial it in perfect. Now I like to rough in both of them before I do any test cuts, because if your blade is pretty out of square to your fence, or if your bevel gauge is pretty off, when you make your test cuts and try to measure them, it can be pretty difficult to get a good read if one of them's kind of messed up. So I like to have both of them pretty close before I go to any test cuts. Now most saws are very similar in how your bevel adjustment works. They normally have bolts in some place. One sets your 90 and one sets your 45. And if you have a dual bevel saw that tips both ways, then you'll probably have 2 45-degree stops. And all you do is back these bolts in or out in order to adjust your 90 and adjust your 45. Now what we're going to do to measure our bevel is reference our fence off the table, and then bring the saw down and set our square against it and see if we have any gaps. Now you want to be careful to make sure you don't rest your square up against any of these carbide teeth sticking out, because that's going to mess up your measurement. Now my saw is actually tipped towards the camera a little bit, so I'm going to have to tighten this bolt to lower it to bring it away from the camera just a little bit. So I'm going to loosen the knob, that way I can take the weight of the saw off of here, loosen the lock nut, and then tighten this down just a hair, and then tighten the nut again. Let's see if that did the trick. All right, looks like we're good. You may have to do some back and forth. I just got lucky this time. Now that the 90 set, it's really easy to set the 45. You do it practically the same way. I like to just take the ruler out of a combination square, set it here. Now you have a 45-degree reference point. So just pull your guard up, tip the saw over, and then adjust as needed. Now that everything's adjusted with the square, it's time for a test cut. All right, we have the cut. Now the blade off or straight, this wood should be straight, and it is because it removed itself, so both of these sides mirror each other and mirror any error. But a way we can magnify any error is by taking the offcut and turning it around. Now, if our saw is adjusted perfectly, this will be straight. But if there's any error, we're actually doubling the error. And I have a little bit of a wobble on this side. Now that wobble means that the blade is actually twisted this way some. If I had a gap where the cut was instead, that would mean that the blade would be twisted the other way. So if everything looks good with your square but you're not quite sure, this little test right here is a good way to find out if you need to make any adjustments. Just make a cut, take the offcut and turn it around, and that doubles any error. I'm not sure if you can see it, but there is a small gap over here. Well, there you go. As you can see, getting a miter saw to cut accurately really isn't very difficult, but if yours isn't cutting accurately, it's a very frustrating experience trying to build anything when you're not getting square cuts. After you've made all your adjustments with your square, then you just do some test cuts with wood to verify that everything's cutting square. If it's not square, then you just make adjustments based off your cuts. You can also use the 5-cut method to verify that everything is cut well, and I'll leave a link in the description to a video on how the 5-cut method works. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. Please give me a thumbs up if you did, and consider subscribing. I do quite a few videos of shop tips like this, how to make sure you're using your tools as effectively as possible, as well as shop projects, try to get your shop a little cleaner, and lots of build videos, which are the really fun part. I recently set up a Patreon page, so if you really enjoyed my content, please consider becoming a patron and supporting me there. That makes this content possible, but no pressure. Thank you for watching. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram. Thank you.